Hi, I'd like to welcome all of you to today's learning journey with Miss Leland, where we're going to introduce the concept or the study of ecology and biology. Ecology happens to be one of my favorite subjects, so I'm really excited about it. And there are a couple of aims. We're going to be a little aggressive in our aims today and looking at the definition of ecology overall. So the first thing I want to do to it is explain to you what the definition of ecology is. We're going to look at ecological organization, which is important in terms of focusing science. We're going to explain the methods that are used in ecological studies, and we're going to look at how organisms obtain energy. Okay, so for those of you that have listened to any of my learning journeys or going through my PowerPoints, I always like to start out with a true-false question. And the purpose of the true-false question is to get your brain focused on some important aspect or broad definition or broad concept for the topic that we're studying. And today's true-false question is whether or not the existence of life on Earth depends only on interactions between different organisms. So are we looking at interactions between living things in ecology, and in this case we're looking at only living things? Or maybe we have to add something to that definition. Alright, the definition of ecology is pretty straightforward. It's not super complicated. I'm going to say to you right now that I would start memorizing, making flashcards, and understanding connections between these vocabulary words now. I know when I teach this unit in my biology class, there are 50 vocabulary words, and if you don't get started now, you end up having some issues later. So the first thing is ecology is just the study of interactions between organisms. So we're going to look at how different organisms interact with each other. How do humans interact with mosquitoes, for example? And we're going to look at organisms and their interactions with their environment. When we say environment, we are going to include both living, all right, and non-living parts. So in this example, if we're looking at mosquitoes and humans, we're going to also look at how their interactions are affected by in this case, we'll look at the non-living parts. And I'm using mosquitoes because I live in Minnesota, and this year the mosquito population has been completely out of control. So not only that, but we have to look at when you are a scientist, if you're going to study the interaction between organisms being humans and mosquitoes, and this year the mosquito population is so high, and that has to do with these non-living parts of ecology, we need to look at what level of organization. So obviously this is an issue right now in Minnesota. It's really not an issue in parts of Arizona and California and other parts of the world. So we will look at the fact that these ecologists will look at a specific level of study and not study the entire planet. So I want to start out with the definitions right away because they're really important. Like I said, there's going to be a lot in this unit, and you really need to make sure that you study them. And the first definition, and you already know what it is, you just need to attach the word to it, is something called an abiotic factor. And an abiotic factor are just those non-living physical aspects of your habitat or your environment. And when you think of these things, usually you would think of soil, you would think of boulders and rocks. Okay, water is another one. The fact that it rains. We also have to take into consideration other things, like how much sunlight does an area get? Is it windy? Is it not windy? What are the temperatures? So there's lots of things that we can't really physically see, but there are things that we can feel or experience that are non-living that affect what type of life it lives in a certain area and how well they survive those conditions. The other vocab word that's important are biotic factors, and those are just organisms living in a part of a habitat. So this is just looking at how organisms interact with each other. So I took a trip to Tanzania a couple years ago and took this picture. It's from a pride of lions. It was really interesting to see how they interacted with each other. to form kinships and bonds so that they could actually be successful as a pride in terms of getting food and raising cubs. So I just finished discussing two really important vocab words in ecology that you need to make sure that you study and understand. The first one was abiotic, and that was looking at organisms and how their physical environment affects them. Things that are non-living. Weather would be one, soil content. The other one was biotic, and those were looking at interactions between different organisms. I showed you between two organisms of the same species. In the beginning, I talked about Minnesota and our mosquito problem. That would also be biotic interactions. And organisms interact in different ways. They interact with each other as a species. They interact with other species, they interact with their environment, and actually, ultimately, organisms all are affecting each other across the globe in one way, shape, or form. Now, to better understand different parts of ecology, scientists have to narrow down their focus and use that as a tool for learning specific information. And there is a level from biggest to smallest, and your teacher either told you biggest to smallest or went from smallest to biggest level. I want you to make sure if you're taking a test or you're being asked a question that you carefully read, highlight, or underline whether you're going big to small or small to big. And I also want to let you know that your teacher's not doing that as a trick me kind of a question. It's more of a question to say, do you understand the concept, or are you merely memorizing a set of words without truly understanding what they are? So we're going to start small, and then we're going to go large. So the smallest would be an individual, and it seems very intuitive that that would be the smallest. So right, we're looking at one. So we have one. I believe that's a caribou in this situation, and the individual is just biotic. We are just looking at one caribou, and the caribou's alive. The second one is a population, and a population are all the individuals of the caribou that live together in a specific area. So we have to define area. So area becomes really important, right? And it's area, and it's the number of individuals. Super important parts of understanding what a population is, okay? The next one's community, and when we look at community, we're looking at only the living things. So I have, I think, a lynx here. I have an owl. I'm guessing this is a woodchuck of some sort. I have a rabbit down here in the bottom. I have a moose. The other thing we need to also consider is the fact that we have a tree. So we have all these trees. We have grass. These are all living things, and they interact with each other. I should also go back and tell you that when we look at populations, we can also look at the population of grass, right? So we have a given area, and how many grass individuals or individual grass plants do we have? And since we're looking at one species, that would be population. So I just went back to population because I forgot to mention that before. But community is just biotic as well. Right, so right now we have, let's look at this. So this is, an individual is biotic. Should change color on that. A population is biotic. Community is biotic. Now when we start to get to ecosystem, we're looking at both abiotic and biotic factors. So it's going to include everything over here plus abiotic factors. So now what we're doing is we're looking at community, and we're looking at non-living environments. So I have a bear, I have some kind of critter that's living over here, I can't really tell. I have a population of grass that's living over here. I have some trees. My abiotic factors in this case would be the lake that's right here, and it would also be all of this air that's above these organisms. And air is really important. Like, how much oxygen do we have? How much carbon dioxide do we have? Do you have particles in the air? Those are all abiotic factors. So an ecosystem is just a community where we've added non-living things. The next one that we have is a biome. Biomes are really kind of hard to grasp as a concept, and they're just sort of more of a longitudinal division, and I'm thinking longitudinal is that horizontal line. I'm not a good geography person, so that those horizontal lines in the planet where we look at tundra forests, we look at rainforests rainforests are normally around the equator, and then south of the equator we have a lot of desert areas. We also have the biome of the oceans. So we're looking at specific parts of the planet that are similar to each other. And the last one is the biosphere, and the biosphere is just the whole planet. That's it. It's a whole entire planet. It's not the universe, it's just the planet. So an ecosystem, abiotic and biotic, right? Biome is abiotic and biotic. An ecosystem is abiotic and biotic, right? Largest. And we move down to the smallest. Make sure you have these make sure you have them in the right order. Make sure that you understand the order that they're in, right? So we have one living organism over here with individual. We have a population or then a specific area, a number of individuals. Over here with the community, we have different types of animals. We have populations of grass, populations of woodchucks, populations of trees. We only have living things. And an ecosystem, that's when we start to add non-living things like the air, the water. Remember, grass is biotic, it's living. Critters that are walking around, animals are living, the trees are living. So that's abiotic and biotic. Then we get to biome, which I said earlier is a little harder concept because we're looking at things like deserts and rainforests. And then the biosphere is the whole planet. Okay, so I spent a whole bunch of time going over all that stuff. I think it was 6 minutes. Thank you for hanging in there. And now I'm actually going to show you some specific examples and some concrete definitions. And I forgot that I had this in the PowerPoint. So we'll probably just try to speed through these things. So the smallest, right? So this is the smallest level of organization. And I forgot the S here. I didn't do well with S. Is an organism or an individual. And it's of a species. And organisms, and definition of species, organisms so similar to each other that they can breed and produce fertile offspring. So we have 2 lions, same species. Lions can reproduce with other lions and have offspring. I also took these pictures in Africa. They're pretty cool. It was really interesting and fun to see these lions interacting with one another. Right, the next one is population, right, and that's the members of the same species inhabiting in an area. I told you the important pieces for this are area and also the number. So how many species do I have? The population of Minnesota is, I don't even know what it is. Well, let's do my hometown. The population of Hamel, Minnesota is 4,952 individual humans, okay? We also have a population of dogs. We also have a population of horses. We have a population of mosquitoes. We have a population of grass. The population would be looking at the number of those specific species and defining the area, which would be the town that I live in. The next one that we have is community. And that's when we look at all those populations in a defined area. So if I look at my hometown of Hamel, I would add up the populations of dogs and cats and humans and mosquitoes and grass. Those would all be part of my community. They're all biotic, right? There's no abiotic factors. So in this case here I have a lion and it's interacting with these zebras. I took this picture too. It's not going down. I'm just going to tell you right now the lion was not successful. The zebras were onto it. But we also in this community have a population of grass, right? I'm only circling or squaring, I guess, part of the grass. We also have these acacia trees. That is also part of the community. All right. Right here as an exception, right? So this is abiotic. It's a rock. The sky is abiotic. So these are things, and I'm putting them in black, that are not part of a community because we're only going to look at living things. All right, next we have an ecosystem. That's the next largest piece. An ecosystem is community, which we talked about earlier, right? And now we're looking at the physical environment, right? The abiotic factors. So in this case here, I took a bunch of these pictures. When we look at this whole entire thing, I have water. It is non-living. Okay? So that's abiotic. It's warm. It's like really, really warm. This is in the Ngorongoro crater. So it's warm. That's an abiotic factor. Okay. The fact that it's windy, that's an abiotic factor. Right? Biotic factors. I have a hippo here and a hippo here. I have some egrets. I believe they were egrets. I have some zebras over here. I have a bunch of grass. Right? These are all different populations of different species. So all this in red are communities. So communities and abiotic factors. So that's how we're getting larger, right? So now we just took a community and now we added non-living things. The next one's a biome. And those are groups of ecosystems that have the same climate and dominant communities. The best one to look at to me, I think, is the rainforest, where it's all along the equator. All rainforests pretty much have monkeys, they all have tall trees, they all have large insect populations, and there's other types of biomes too that I'm sure the amount and level of detail that you need to go into it, your teacher will talk to you about. I, as a class, don't really spend a lot of time talking about it. Specific ones, I mean, we discuss obviously the definition, but we don't get too specific. And then the last one's biosphere, and that's just all of the earth. Really, that's it. It's the planet. Okay, it's all the life, and it's the land, it's the water, it's the air, it's the temperature, it's the humidity, it's everything that is on the planet Earth. Okay, so I usually have a part in my PowerPoint presentations where I ask you to pause. I want you to look at a picture. I want you to try to determine whether this picture is dealing with organisms, population, community, ecosystem, biome, or biosphere. I also would like you to, in some of the examples with this, you can say, okay, I'm going to circle an organism. I'm going to look at what a population would be. This is what I need to add for a community. This is an ecosystem. This is showing me a biome, biosphere. So you can add more than one thing for this, right? Because they're building. So this is the smallest. Then we have population. Then we have community. And then we have ecosystem. We have biome. And then we have biosphere. So if it's going to be like an ecosystem or a biome or a biosphere, obviously you're going to have the things above it. So push pause, wait a minute, and then we'll get back to the conversation. Okay, I hope you took that seriously and you sat down and you looked at different things. And so actually when we look at this, let's start and see the first part. So I have an organism right here. So check, we have an organism. Now, do I have populations? You betcha. I have this huge population right here of fish. Okay, I have a population of some starfish or sea stars down here. This picture's kind of hard to read. I have populations of birds that are flying up in the air. Oh, look, I have whales. That's kind of cool. So I have different populations. So when I look just at the whales as a population, I look just at the fish as a population, and I would have to count the numbers, right? So how many fish do I have? And I circled an area that they would live in. So I do have population. Now I have many populations because I have more than one population. I have a community, right? So I have birds as a population, I have these whales as a population, I have these fish as a population, I have another species of fish as a population, I have these brittle sea stars, I believe, as a population. I have some other types of fish, which is a different species of fish, and they're a population. I have, I'm trying to figure out what some of these things are, and I don't even know. So I have a community, right? I have all these, I numbered all these different species. I'm sure you can find some more. Now the next thing is, let's see if we can add abiotic factors, right? So all of these are just biotic. And here's where we start adding abiotic and biotic. And I'm actually going to change the color on this. So abiotic and biotic so that we can look at it. So now all of our abiotics I'm going to put in black. So water, definitely abiotic. Super important in this type of ecosystem, right? We have air up above here. We have clouds that give us an idea of maybe the temperature. We have this rock structure right here. Okay, we have the bottom and what the bottom looks like. Some of this bottom's alive. In order for things to live down on the bottom, it has to have special abiotic characteristics. So we definitely have an ecosystem going on here. Now, whether or not we have a biome, not exactly sure. Okay, I can't, it's not showing a specific section. So that one right here is sort of questionable, and we definitely don't have a biosphere because we're not showing all of the planet. Okay, for this one I'm going to give you 30 seconds to pause, or you shouldn't even have to pause. Right now you should have the answer. This right here is without a doubt my biosphere, right? It's the planet Earth. It's the whole thing. That's it. Done. End of story. Okay, this one, when we're looking at it, it's not showing pictures of organisms. It's not showing a population. It's not showing pictures of community. It's showing different, it's not showing different ecosystems, but it is showing biomes. This is what a biome is. I have a desert biomes, and you can see those in the United States. You can see them in Africa. You can see them in different parts of the Middle East. They all have the same type of temperature. They're all covered with sand. They don't have a lot of life. We have the savanna. When we have it in Africa, we end up having lots of antelope, which are a lot like the savanna deers that we would have in the United States. We also have rainforest, which I talked about earlier, right? Lots and lots of water, lots of tall trees, lots of insects, monkeys. I have savanna again, and then I have desert again. So these would be examples of biomes, and they are found on not just Africa, but we also find them in the United States and other parts of the world where we get these specific biomes. Okay, so next I'm going to have you pause again, and you're going to look and see which one. So organism, right, being the smallest. Population is number of organisms in a given area. Community are all the populations in a given area. Ecosystem, we start adding abiotic factors to our community. Biome is looking at the bigger picture, and biosphere is looking at the earth. Push pause, check some stuff out, see if you can identify different things. Alright, let's look at this now. So organism, here's a lion, here's a black rhino, here's a giraffe. Do I have individuals, organisms? Absolutely. Check. Population. Look, I have a certain number of giraffes. Zebras. It's late. I haven't gotten a lot of sleep. I'm not even going to go back and fix this because I've already fixed a bunch of stuff before. So we're going to go with, look at those zebras, Miss Leland. And we know we have two, and we're given a definite area. And our area is the savanna habitat. Okay, we also have population of Thompson gazelles. Over here I happen to have two. I don't see any other places. I have a population of elephants. I have a population of trees. Right, there's my giraffe. I crossed them out. I have a population of different types of grasses. Alright, so there's population. And because I have so many populations, I can go, check, community. Look at all those populations, I have a community. Now, ecosystem, we're going to do abiotic factors, right? So That would be things like the water. That would be the air and the clouds. It would be, let's do this, right, some abiotic factors, temperature, humidity, how often it rains, how much rain do we get, are there dry seasons, are there wet seasons. All right, let's look at biome. All right, so this right here is using a biome word, which is savanna. So you could probably argue this one way or the another. The actual picture itself is giving you the name of a biome. It's not showing you the entire biome. It's just showing you an ecosystem in the biome. So you could argue that either way with your teacher. It is not showing the entire planet. So I'd say no to the biosphere. All right, we're going to do quick quizzes. You're going to push pause if you can't answer it right away by the time that I get done talking. So population, abiotic, biotic, or both. So population, right, number of species in an area, right? So we define an area and we give it a number. So I have the number of humans in Hamel. And that number, so here's my spot, my defined area, and the number is, it's like around 5,000. It's kind of a small town. Okay, so I have only spoken about biotic things, right? Numbers of people. That's it. Nothing else. So that would be a biotic factor. Next we have ecosystems, right? Push pause for a second, and then we'll look at if they're biotic or abiotic. Okay, so ecosystems are really communities, right? Communities are different numbers of populations, different types of populations in a given area, so it's many populations. And then we're going to add non-living things. Non-living. And we said that those were abiotic. Communities are biotic. So our answer to this question is it's both. All right, now we're going to look at communities, right? Communities are different populations living together. So maybe in the future here we'll learn a better way to do this and make it look more professional, but for right now this is all we got. Alright, so we're only looking at populations. I'm not talking at all about abiotic factors. That was ecosystem, right? So this is biotic. This is the highest level of biotic organization you can get. So it's highest level of biotic. I often ask my students what the highest level of biotic factors is, and that would be community, right? Smallest would be an individual. Okay, biosphere. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh my gosh, it's the planet. Okay, both biotic, abiotic. It's everything. Not even going to bother trying to draw anything besides a circle because it would be really, really scary and not at all look like the planet Earth. But this would just be Earth. It's a big guy. Okay, biome. The amount or depth that you need to understand for biome is completely different for each teacher. My students just sort of need to know that it has to do with ecosystems that are similar and that are found in, so are similar, found, ecosystems are similar found on the planet, right, and usually on different continents. Earlier we said that ecosystems were abiotic, right? And biotic. Right? And all we're doing is we're taking and we're making many ecosystems. So we have a lot of ecosystems here, so those are going to be both. And I also ask my students sometimes what's the smallest level organization where we include abiotic factors. That would be ecosystem. Right? So that would be what an ecosystem is, and a biome is the next step up from that. Okay, species. Species, we said, were groups of organisms that can have offspring together, right? So species is normally more than one organism. So all these individuals of people who have, I don't know, bizarre, weird hair. They're that are Burger King hats, I'm not quite sure. But so here's a species. These are the species of stick people, right? So it's the stick people species, which means they can have stick people offspring. So those would be biotic because we're only just looking at the people themselves. We're not looking at anything that is non-living. Okay, now you can tell that I normally use turning technologies if you know what that is for these questions. That's why I'm having you pause. So we look at individuals, right? We're looking at one individual. And that would be biotic because we have one that's living. Okay, there's different ways that we study ecology. So now we just looked at the ways that scientists try to break it down because ecology is so big. The planet's huge. You gotta try to micromanage it into little smaller parts and pieces. And there's different ways because of ecology and the study of ecology. We study it differently than using the scientific method because a lot of times we need to see what happens in nature. And if we are looking at nature and we try to control it, we're not going to get results. So the first, one of the first ways we can do ecological studies is just observations. So we use our senses and we develop questions and we sometimes try to make experiments in the lab or we try to do some modeling. We try to collect trends and data based on what we see. We do some experimentation, okay, and we can use and test some hypotheses in labs or in the field. I know that sometimes we try to do experimentation that gives us some information but doesn't necessarily tell us how these organisms would act in the wild. It will tell us how to respond to different stimuli that are found in the environment that they are exposed to in the lab, which is most likely the environment that they would be exposed to in the wild. New thing that we're using a lot of is modeling, and it's based off mathematical formulas collected from data to make predictions. And we're using this a lot in computer simulations where we add and take away different organisms and see what happens. This right here are my students, actually. One of them and I take them out into the pond where we actually look at and make observations about the different type of species we have that live in the ponds around our high school. Right, our last aim is looking at how energy is obtained by living organisms. And there's two different ways that we can do that. One is through producers, or sometimes we call them autotrophs. Auto means self. Such an important word, self. Okay, automobile, self-driving mobile. Before that we had horse-drawn carriages. An automatic car shifts gears for you automatically. You no longer have to use a clutch and shift it yourself. An automatic coffee maker. Dude, it makes your coffee. You don't have to boil it on the stove and do things the old-fashioned way. So it's self. And troph has to do with energy production. In this case, I use the word food, but really it's more about energy. A trophic level is an energy level. So producers are autotrophs. They are things that make their own food. And they use that by harvesting abiotic factors. And they store these energy in compounds, and they are making the compounds for themselves. So the plant is a good example of a producer. It's a self-food producer, right? It takes the sunlight, it makes its own carbohydrates. It uses those carbohydrates to grow and develop and produce seeds. And then we have other organisms that take advantage of that. Plants and other producers. There are some producers that I think we're going to talk about in the next slide that don't use the sun, but use chemicals. They're in hydrothermal vents under the ground. But they're essential to energy flow in an ecosystem, right? So they use the sun, which is an abiotic factor. What does it even look like? Does that look like the sun? I don't know. Whatever. So they use the sun, which is abiotic, And if our sun went out, so if we lost the sun and the sun was gone, we would lose our plants. So they're essential, right? They go, we go. Okay, now we're going to look at the actual use of plants in being an autotroph and how they actually make this sugar that you and I are going to use. And it's a process called photosynthesis. Meaning photo meaning light, right? Synthesis means to put together. When you synthesize something, you're putting it together. So they're putting together energy from the sun, and you already know this. You already know photosynthesis. There's nothing to memorize. If you have a plant, so here's my plant. Now it's looking like my stick people, right, that I drew earlier. All right, there you go. Now it looks more like a plant. We like plants because they take carbon dioxide out of the air, right? We talked about growing more plants to clean up our air. If you have a plant, you need to water it. Those don't even look like water drops, but you need to water it. If I tried to make a watering can, it would just make things worse. But if you have a plant, we like plants to take up carbon dioxide. If you have a plant, you need to water it. If you don't water it, it dies. We need to put this plant in the sun, so it needs light, right? So we need the sun, which is my light source, okay? And we like plants so much because they give us sugar. We know that because most plants taste good and sugary. Think of things of fruits and berries and apples. Those organisms, plant organisms that taste terrible, do so as a defense mechanism so that they're not eaten. I mean, they're working hard to make all these sugars and they would like to survive. And having a herbivore come by and munch up is not really good for your survival. We like plants because they give off oxygen. Okay, so carbon dioxide goes in, water goes in, sun goes in, oxygen comes out, and we like plants because they taste good. Now we have something really cool called chemosynthesis. If you really want to look at more stuff about chemosynthesis, I would look up something called hydrothermal vents. So I show my students if I have time, a video on hydrothermal vents. They're found deep in the ocean where the water pressure is so high that you and I would just be crushed to get to death, and also the temperature is so high we would boil before we would even have to worry about being crushed. But we have, way down deep in the sea, these organisms, they're bacteria, that live on the ocean floor, and they grow and make their own carbohydrates. They make their own carbohydrates, and because of that, we have all these life that grows on the bottom of the ocean without any sun ever reaching it. These things over here are called tube worms. This red stuff right here are bacteria, but the tube worms are actually these sticky things that are sticking out. Those would be the tube worms. And there's crabs and fish and all sorts of other really cool things. You should really look it up on YouTube and find out some more about hydrothermal vents. Okay, consumers. I used some of these words earlier. I'm hoping that you remember them from 7th grader. But a consumer is one that consumes. Hetero means other. Okay, the easiest way to remember that actually is because of the word heterosexual, other sex, right? Versus homosexual, same sex. I tell my students that there's no way you can forget that hetero means other or different and homo means the same. It's words that we often use in everyday language, and we're going to take advantage of the fact that you have some background knowledge on this to help you remember. So hetero means other, troph means getting its energy from some other place. That means that it has to eat some kind of organism. It is using biotic factors. It's using living things. We have herbivores, they eat plants. We have carnivores, they kill, and they eat other animals. We're going to talk later about something called a scavenger, and we'll also look at parasites. But so I want you to know that carnivores actually eat and kill, And an omnivore eats plants and animals. I also took these pictures. So here's a bunch of zebras. They're a bunch of herbivores. This, I actually, we missed watching this lion take down this zebra by 5 minutes, which is kind of a bummer, but we got to see her right away at the beginning. So she's definitely a carnivore. This right here is a jackal, more of an omnivore, more opportunistic, and that's how these things survive. These are vocab words you got to memorize: heterotroph, autotroph, producer, consumer, herbivore, carnivore, omnivore, photosynthesis, chemosynthesis. Start writing them down. Start to remember these words, or you're going to have a hard time later when you have to discuss these things in a test or a question on a worksheet. So start studying them. All right, now we have something called a decomposer. And as I've stated in some other form earlier, I teach 10th grade biology. So the biology that you're learning here, if you are above 10th grade biology, there are exceptions to everything, and we are just learning the basics. So if you are in disagreement with what I'm saying, then you need to be looking at some kind of higher level of biology definitions than what I'm giving you. So a decomposer is something that chemically breaks down organic, living and non-living material. All right, and they produce something called detritus. And I like to think of decomposers as not having a mouth. So no mouth. Right? So we have bacteria over here. So these are my bacteria. These are my mushrooms, which are parts of the reproductive parts of fungi. Neither one of them have mouths. They take living and non-living things, and they secrete chemicals and then later just absorb what the chemicals have broken down. And when I say non-living, there are some bacteria and some fungus that can actually grow on human skin and other organisms, even though we're alive. They decompose, but most of the decomposers that we see on the planet actually are attached to dead things. In this case, of course, these mushrooms or this fungi, this mold, is growing on a living tree. Next, we have something called a detritivore, and I try to say it as many times as possible, because when you try to memorize a word, when you try and you memorize it incorrectly every time you say it, you pronounce it a different way, you're going to forget the word when it comes the time to demonstrate your knowledge. So I want you to try to practice the word detritivore. And these things feed on decomposing matter. They feed on detritus. And we just talked before about detritus comes from decomposers. All right, so those come from posers, those detritus. These things have mouths. Okay, so right here I have some type of an isopod, like a roly-poly. I have a crayfish over here. This right here, this picture right here is showing something called marine snow, which is actually a type of detritus that's formed that supports lots of parts of the organism. So the big thing is detritus is produced by decomposers, and that detritus is eaten by organisms that have mouthpieces. And there's a cycle between the two where they go around and they go around. And depending on which biology book you refer to, things can get more confusing than that. We are just going to simply state that decomposers, fungi, bacteria, no mouth, detritivores, they have a mouth, and they use that mouth to eat things that have already started decomposing by decomposers. Okay, then we have scavengers, and scavengers are animals that consume the carcass of other animals that have died for various reasons. They are also can be carnivores. So we have some organisms, for example, a hyena. So a hyena can either be a carnivore and sometimes it acts as a scavenger. Man, if there's a free meal, I'm taking it. So a lot of carnivores act as scavengers. Lions are carnivores, but they also act as scavengers. Bald eagles are carnivores, but they also act as scavengers. This right here is a turkey. A turkey, not a turkey. I was going to say turkey vulture, but those are in Minnesota. This right here is a African vulture. I should know I took the picture for... Anyways, I took the picture, so I should remember. It's an African vulture, and this is a wildebeest carcass. And a vulture is just a scavenger. You aren't going to see vultures running around trying to kill rodents and small other prey items like you would with a hyena. Sometimes hyenas take down things that are bigger than that. I also took this picture too. They're like massively huge organisms. Holy cramoly. Okay, I really like this picture that I took. And I want you to pause for a minute. I want you to find species. I want you to find populations. I want you to figure out the community. And I want you to figure out if this is an ecosystem. This is a picture I took in the Ngorongoro crater in Tanzania. So push pause and then just try to find all those different things, and then we'll point them out because some of them are really cool and unexpected. Alright, so the first one, my most favorite one, is this is actually a huge population of hippopotamus. They look like rocks, but they're hippos. And they're all together, right? So hippos are a species. The population is the population for this is the number of hippos in the crater. I told you before it was the Ngorongoro crater. So that would be my population. My species is the hippo. Okay, community. Those are all the other organisms. So I have zebras over here. I have this whole community of grass, not community, sorry, I have this whole population of grass that makes up part of the community. I have these white birds back here, right? So I have a population of white birds, that's part of the community. I have a different type of grass here, that's part of the community. When I look at ecosystem, right, I have water, I have a rock right here. I have actually, if you go on the crater, if you look in the back here, it's like a bowl. This is like the mountain range that goes all the way around. And you usually see clouds rolling over, so that would be part of the abiotic factors of the community. The fact there's always water in the crater, which is nice for the organisms that live there. It allows them to stay. That would also be an abiotic factor. Okay, here's another one. So push pause, see what you can find, and we'll talk about it. Okay, species. I have an individual, I guess. So here's an individual bird. Right? It is a species. When I talk about a bunch of them together, I would use the word species. So right here I have a species of bison. Right here I have a species of gophers. I could say that the population in a specific area, and I can even say the population in these 2 square feet is a population of, and then count 1, 2, I think 3, 4 gophers in this little area. That'd be a population, right? So you have 1, 2, 3 bison in this area here. That would be my population of bison. All right, so community-wise, I have this bird, some kind of a grouse or something, I'm not quite sure. My groundhogs is a population, my bison is a population. I have a population of flowers over here, right? So that's a population of flowers. I have a population of trees, a population of grass over here. All sorts of different species of grass, right? All right, so that's my population of different things. And when I add them all together, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Am I missing some of them? You bet. But so I have all of these different populations of different species. That makes my community. Then as soon as I started adding abiotic factors, that's when I get the ecosystem, right? So fire is an abiotic factor, rain and cloud cover. So right here I don't have a lot of sun, right? And I have rain coming down. That is abiotic factors. There's a river back here, abiotic factors. There's rocks and sand right here. That really affects what type of organisms live. There you can see part of the dirt on this grass here that affects the grass that's growing as well. So that would be ecosystem. This is not showing any biomes. This is not showing the biosphere for sure because it's not showing the whole planet. All right, so this really was an easy question, I think, from the beginning and got answered right away in the first slide. The existence on life on Earth depends only on interactions between different organisms. I mean, the key word here being only. Are there times when different organisms interact? Yeah, you bet. You know, the populations of organisms that work together. We have carnivores, we have herbivores, we have omnivores, we have scavengers, we have all sorts of ways that organisms interact. But we also have to really worry about those non-living factors, those abiotic factors. Right? So if it's not raining, that has a huge impact on what type of organism can grow. If it's raining all the time, that has a huge impact on what type of organism can grow. So the existence of life on Earth depends on many interactions between different organisms and their abiotic factors. So the answer is no, or the answer is false. All right, so you reached the end of, I have no idea how long this presentation is because I push pause in between each slide. I also took this picture in Africa. It was very interesting because I was standing on the ground when I took it, and these were wild elephants, and it was really pretty fun to take this picture, although I was frightened half to death. And as you can see, it's their end as well. I hope to see you again. Actually, I'm not even seeing you, and you're not even seeing me, so I hope to have you listen to me again, and I really, really hope that this is helping you. I'm making it available to my students, but I'm also trying to help that other students in other biology classes are getting something out of this as well. All right, thanks, and I'm going to say goodnight because I think it's 11:30 at night here in Minnesota, and that means I am done for the day. Talk at you later.